He wasn't supposed to walk away with nothing, but sometimes, what you lose is the only way something forgotten can find you again. The courthouse doors shut behind Caleb Ward with a dull, final echo, like a lid closing on a life that no longer belonged to him. The late afternoon air carried a dry chill, the kind that settled into your bones without asking permission, and for a moment, he just stood there on the concrete steps, unmoving, as if waiting for someone to call him back, to tell him there'd been a mistake. No one did. Cars passed. A flag snapped faintly in the distance. Somewhere, a siren wailed and faded. Everything kept moving, except him. In his hand was a single set of keys, light, almost weightless. No house in the suburbs. No shared bank account. No photographs on polished walls. Just a deed to something the lawyer had called non-essential property. A shack. 30 miles outside town. Uninhabitable, they said. Worth less than the paperwork it took to transfer it. His ex-wife hadn't even argued for it. She'd smiled, thin and polite, like someone discarding a broken chair. Caleb glanced down as a shadow brushed against his leg. Ghost! The German shepherd stood close, silent, his sable coat catching the last strips of sunlight, amber eyes steady and unreadable. He hadn't made a sound inside the courtroom. Not when voices rose. Not when signatures sealed everything. Just waited. Like he always did. Caleb exhaled slowly, the breath visible in the cooling air. Guess it's just us, he murmured, voice low, almost swallowed by the wind. Ghost's ears twitched, but he didn't move away. If anything, he stepped closer. The drive out took longer than Caleb remembered. The road narrowed, pavement giving way to gravel, then to something closer to memory than infrastructure. Trees closed in on either side, tall and still, their branches whispering faintly as dusk began to settle. The sky stretched wide above the clearing when it finally appeared, a structure barely holding its shape against time. The shack leaned slightly to one side, weather-beaten wood faded to a tired grey, the roof patched in places like someone had once tried to keep it alive and then given up. The porch sagged. One window was cracked. The door hung crooked on its hinges. Caleb killed the engine but didn't step out right away. The silence here was different. Thicker. Not empty, just waiting. He reached for the keys, turning them once in his palm before opening the truck door. Gravel crunched under his boots as he approached. Each step felt louder than it should have. Ghost moved ahead of him, not running, not eager, just purposeful. The dog stopped at the base of the porch, staring at the house, head slightly tilted, as if listening to something Caleb couldn't hear. Yeah, Caleb muttered, climbing the steps carefully, wood creaking under his weight. Not much to look at. He pushed the door open. It resisted at first, then gave with a slow, aching groan. The smell hit him immediately, dust, old wood, something faintly metallic beneath it. The last light of day slipped through the broken window, cutting across the floor in thin golden lines. The space was small. Bare. A table missing one leg. A chair turned on its side. Nothing else. Or at least, nothing obvious. Caleb stepped inside, boots stirring a thin layer of dust that floated briefly in the air before settling again. Behind him, Ghost entered without hesitation. He didn't sniff around like most dogs would. Didn't explore the corners. He walked to the center of the room, and stopped. Still. Focused. Then, slowly, he lowered his head, and stared at the floor. Caleb did not speak at first because something in the way Ghost stood there made the air feel heavier, as if the room itself had drawn a quiet breath and was holding it. The dog's body was still but not relaxed, every line of him focused downward, ears slightly forward, eyes fixed on a spot in the warped wooden floor as though it mattered more than anything else in the world, and Caleb felt it then, not fear, not exactly, but a shift, subtle and uninvited, like stepping into a place where someone else had already been waiting long before you arrived. He let the silence stretch, the faint sound of wind brushing against the outer walls slipping through the cracks, carrying with it the dry scent of pine and distant earth, and then he took a slow step forward, boots creaking against the boards, the wood giving just slightly under his weight. "What is it, boy?" he murmured, his voice low, careful, as if speaking too loudly might break something fragile he could not see. Ghost did not look up, did not wag his tail, did not move except for a slight shift of his front paw, pressing down once against the floor, then again, deliberate, almost testing, and the faintest dull thud answered back. Softer than it should have been. Caleb frowned, glancing around the room again as if expecting to find some obvious explanation, but there was nothing, just the same tired walls, the same empty corners, the same quiet that seemed to settle deeper the longer he stood there. He crouched slowly, one knee brushing the dusty floor, the smell of old wood rising stronger now, and reached out with his hand, pressing his palm flat against the boards where Ghost had been focused. The surface was cold, uneven, worn smooth in places by time. But beneath it there was something else, something not quite solid, a hollow echo that did not match the rest of the room. Caleb tapped lightly with his knuckles, once, twice, and the sound came back duller, softer, like knocking on a memory instead of wood. Ghost shifted closer, lowering himself beside Caleb, his nose hovering inches from the spot, breath steady, patient, as if he had already known this was here and was simply waiting for Caleb to catch up. "That is not right," Caleb whispered under his breath, more to himself than to the dog, and he ran his fingers along the seams between the boards, tracing the lines where time had split the wood into narrow, uneven paths, searching for anything that did not belong. The light from the window had dimmed further now, the gold fading into a cooler grey, shadows stretching longer across the floor, and in that shifting half-light, he saw it, a faint difference in the grain. A slight misalignment where one section did not quite match the rest, subtle enough to miss if you were not looking for it, but impossible to ignore once you saw it. His pulse slowed, not from calm but from focus, the kind that had once kept him steady in places where hesitation could cost everything, and without thinking, he reached into his pocket, pulling out the small folding knife he still carried out of habit, flipping it open with a quiet click that seemed louder than it should have been in the stillness. Ghost did not react to the sound, only watched, eyes steady, unblinking. Caleb slid the tip of the blade carefully into the narrow seam and applied gentle pressure, testing, and for a moment nothing happened, the wood resisting, stubborn with age. And then with a soft, reluctant shift, it gave just slightly, enough to confirm what he already felt in his bones, that this floor was not as simple as it looked. He exhaled slowly, a thin breath that carried something close to disbelief, and leaned back on his heels, glancing at Ghost, who finally lifted his gaze to meet his, and in that quiet exchange, there was no excitement, no triumph, just a shared understanding that something had been found, and whatever it was, it had been waiting a long time to be seen. Caleb did not rush it because something about the way the wood had given under the blade told him this was not meant to be forced, and he had learned long ago that patience revealed more than strength ever could. He shifted his weight slightly, adjusting his position on the floor as the last light outside thinned into a muted grey, the room dimming just enough to make every movement feel slower, more deliberate, and he reached forward again, this time running his fingers along the loosened edge, feeling for a grip, for a place where time had already done part of the work for him. The board was colder than the others, its surface worn smooth in a way that did not match the rest of the floor, as if it had been touched more often once, long ago, and then forgotten entirely. Ghost remained beside him, his presence steady, the soft rhythm of his breathing the only constant sound in the room now. And when Caleb finally hooked his fingers under the slight gap and pulled, the wood lifted with a low, drawn-out creak that seemed to echo deeper than it should have, like a door opening somewhere beneath them. Dust drifted up in a thin cloud, catching what little light remained. And for a moment Caleb paused, watching it settle, listening, half expecting something else to follow, but there was only silence, thick and patient. He set the board aside carefully, revealing a dark, narrow space beneath, not large, not dramatic, just enough to suggest intention, a compartment built by someone who did not want to be obvious. The air that rose from it carried a different scent, faint but distinct, metal and paper and something older, something that had been sealed away long enough to lose its place in time. Caleb leaned closer, resting one hand against the floor for balance as he peered into the opening, eyes adjusting to the dimness, and there it was, not hidden in layers, not buried deep, just waiting, a rectangular object resting quietly in the hollow as if it had never expected to be found again. He reached in slowly, his fingers brushing against cold metal, the surface rough with age but intact, and when he lifted it free, it came with a soft weight, heavier than it looked, solid in a way that suggested it held more than just space. It was a small box, military style, edges reinforced, the kind designed to endure time and weather, its once dull finish now worn to a muted, uneven sheen. Caleb turned it slightly in his hands, the faint scrape of metal against his skin grounding him in the moment, and he noticed then the detail that made his breath slow just a fraction more. A barely visible marking along one side, scratched rather than stamped, a set of letters and numbers that did not belong to chance. Ghost shifted closer, his nose hovering near the box, not touching, just present, as if acknowledging something beyond the object itself. Caleb swallowed, his throat dry, not from fear but from the quiet weight of recognition that had not yet fully formed, and he sat back slightly, placing the box on the floor between them, his hand resting lightly on top of it as though it might move if he let go. The room seemed smaller now, the walls pressing in just enough to make the silence feel heavier, and outside, the wind picked up slightly, brushing against the structure with a low, steady whisper that slipped through the cracks and settled around them. He glanced at Ghost again, and the dog met his gaze without hesitation, calm, certain, as if this had never been a question of if, only when. Caleb let out a slow breath and finally traced his thumb along the edge of the lid, feeling the faint resistance of a seal that had not been broken in years, and for a brief moment, he hesitated, not because he was afraid of what might be inside, but because some part of him understood that whatever waited in that box did not belong to the past anymore, not once it was opened, not once it was seen, and then, with a quiet, steady motion, he began to lift the lid. The lid did not open all at once but with a slow, reluctant give, like something that had forgotten how to be seen, and as Caleb lifted it the faintest metallic whisper slipped into the air, subtle yet sharp enough to make him pause halfway, his hand steady but his breath held just a fraction longer than before. Inside, there was no sudden shine, no obvious treasure, just layers, careful and deliberate, as if whoever had placed these things here had intended them to be understood in time rather than at a glance. The top layer was a bundle of papers, bound with a thin, aging band that had long since lost its tension, edges yellowed but intact, the corners softened by years that had passed without disturbance. Caleb reached in slowly, lifting the bundle with both hands, the paper lighter than he expected, fragile but not crumbling, and as he set it down on the floor beside the box, the faint scent of ink and dust rose quietly. Something almost familiar, something that did not belong to this empty place yet somehow fit perfectly within it. Ghost leaned in slightly, watching, his ears forward but his body still composed, as if he understood that whatever this was, it mattered more than movement. Caleb unfolded the top sheet carefully, smoothing it against the worn floorboards, and his eyes moved across the lines slowly, not rushing, not scanning, but absorbing each word as if it carried weight beyond its shape. It was a letter, handwritten, the script steady and deliberate, the kind that came from someone who had taken their time, who had chosen each word with intention, and though the name at the bottom was not his, something in the tone felt closer than it should have, as if it had been written for someone who would arrive later, someone who did not yet know they were part of the story. He swallowed lightly, shifting his gaze to the next page, then the next, each one building quietly on the last, references to places, to dates, to a life that had once moved with purpose and then been set aside without explanation. Beneath the letters, he found photographs, small, matte prints, their edges worn but the images still clear enough to hold meaning. A man in uniform standing beside a structure that looked almost identical to this one, younger, straighter, with the same line of trees in the background, the same horizon stretching wide behind it. Caleb's fingers hovered over the image for a moment before he picked it up, holding it closer to the fading light, and there it was again, that same marking, the same sequence of letters and numbers, etched faintly into the corner of the photo, matching the one scratched into the metal box. He felt something shift inside him then, not a realization yet, but a pull, a connection forming slowly, like a thread being drawn tight between two points that had never been meant to meet. He set the photograph down gently and looked back into the box, noticing now that the papers had only been the beginning, that beneath them lay something else, something more solid, more deliberate, partially wrapped in cloth that had once been tightly folded but now rested loosely, as if time itself had loosened its hold. Caleb reached in again, peeling the cloth back carefully, revealing a small stack of items arranged with quiet precision, and at the center of them, resting alone, was a pair of dog tags, dulled with age but unmistakable, the metal catching just enough of the dim light to draw his focus completely. His hand slowed as he reached for them, fingertips brushing the cool surface, and when he lifted them free, the faint clink of metal echoed softly in the room, a sound that seemed to carry farther than it should have, settling into the silence like something remembered rather than heard. Ghost shifted closer again, his gaze fixed not on Caleb now, but on the tags themselves, his posture steady, almost reverent, and Caleb felt it then, clearer this time, that whatever story had been hidden here had not ended, not entirely, and somehow, without warning, without choice, he had just stepped into the middle of it. Caleb held the dog tags a moment longer than necessary, not because he was unsure of what they were, but because something about their weight felt different, heavier than metal, as if they carried the quiet imprint of a life that had not fully let go. The chain slipped slightly between his fingers with a soft metallic whisper, and he turned them just enough for the dim light to catch the surface, revealing the engraved letters worn but still legible. A name he did not recognize, a service number etched with precision, and beneath it, a unit designation that made his breath slow, not from shock, but from recognition that settled deeper than thought. Ghost remained close, his posture unchanged, his gaze steady, and when Caleb glanced at him, there was no urgency there, no demand, just a calm insistence, the kind that had guided him through moments when instinct mattered more than explanation. Caleb lowered the tags carefully onto the floor beside the letters and photographs, arranging them with a quiet respect he did not question, and then he reached back into the box, knowing now that what remained inside was not random, not forgotten, but placed with intention, piece by piece, waiting for someone willing to look long enough to understand. Beneath the cloth, tucked into one corner, was a sealed envelope, thicker than the others, its edges still sharp, its surface marked with a single line written in the same steady hand as the letters above. The ink faded slightly, but unmistakable, and though the words were simple, they carried a weight that settled immediately in his chest, not as pressure, but as presence. Caleb hesitated before touching it, not out of fear, but out of respect for the quiet boundary it seemed to hold, as if opening it would not just reveal something hidden, but would also change something that had remained untouched until now. Outside, the wind shifted again, brushing along the walls with a low, steady rhythm, and the sound seemed to echo faintly through the floorboards, grounding him in the moment, reminding him that this place, as worn and forgotten as it appeared, had endured more than just time. He exhaled slowly and lifted the envelope, feeling the firmness of its contents beneath the paper, and for a second, he simply held it, his thumb resting along the sealed edge, tracing the line where it would open, his mind quiet, not searching for answers, not forming conclusions, just present. Ghost shifted slightly, lowering himself to the floor beside Caleb, his body settling into a calm, watchful stillness, and the simple act carried more reassurance than words ever could, a silent reminder that whatever this was, he was not facing it alone. Caleb nodded faintly, more to himself than to the dog, and slid a finger carefully beneath the flap, easing it open with slow, deliberate movement, the paper giving with a soft, almost reluctant tear that sounded louder than it should have in the stillness. He reached inside and withdrew the contents, a folded document, thicker than the letters, official in its texture, and as he opened it, the faint crease lines straightened under his hands, revealing structured text, signatures, and markings that immediately set it apart from everything else he had seen so far. His eyes moved across the page, not quickly, not scanning, but absorbing, line by line, the language precise, formal, and unmistakably legal, and with each word, the shape of something larger began to form, not fully clear yet, but enough to suggest that this was not just a record of the past, not just a collection of memories, but something active, something that had been left behind not to be forgotten, but to be claimed. Caleb's grip tightened slightly, not out of tension, but focus, and he leaned back just enough to take in the full page, the fading light now barely enough to illuminate the details, and still, it was enough. The name on the document was the same as the one on the dog tags, but the final line held something else, something that made him pause, not in disbelief, but in quiet realization, the kind that arrives without noise and settles without warning. He lowered the paper slowly, his gaze drifting for a moment to the open box, to the letters, the photographs, the tags resting where he had placed them, and then to Ghost, who met his eyes once more with that same steady calm, as if he had already known where this would lead. Caleb let out a long breath, the kind that did not release tension but acknowledged it, and in that quiet, dim room, with the wind whispering against the walls and the weight of the past laid out before him, he understood one simple truth: this place had not been left to him by accident, and whatever had been hidden here had not been waiting for just anyone to find it. Caleb read the document again, slower this time, letting each line settle fully before moving to the next, and the structure of it became clearer with every word, not just a record but a transfer, not just a name but an intention, something left behind with purpose and direction. And as he traced the final paragraph once more, the quiet certainty began to take shape in his chest, not loud, not overwhelming, but steady, like something aligning after being out of place for a long time. The document spoke of ownership, of rights that had not expired, of assets that had never been claimed, all tied to the same name etched into the dog tags now resting beside him, and beneath it all, a clause, simple in language yet impossible to ignore, stating that the contents of this place, the land, the structure, and everything within its boundary, were to pass to the next rightful bearer upon discovery, not through inheritance by blood, but through presence, through finding, through standing. Exactly where Caleb now sat, he lowered the paper slightly, his eyes unfocused for a moment as the weight of it settled in a different way, not as confusion, but as realization that did not ask for permission before arriving. Ghost shifted beside him, letting out a slow breath, his body relaxed now, as if something had reached its natural conclusion, and Caleb glanced at him again. The connection between them quieter than ever but stronger for it, a shared understanding. Without words, outside, the last of the light had faded, leaving only a soft, blue-gray glow filtering through the broken window, and the interior of the shack seemed to hold that dimness gently, not dark, not empty, just still, like a place that had waited long enough to finally rest. Caleb folded the document carefully, not rushing, aligning the edges as they had been before, and placed it beside the other items, his movements deliberate, respectful, as if he were not just handling objects, but acknowledging something larger than himself. He reached for the dog tags again, lifting them slightly, letting them hang between his fingers, and this time, he noticed something he had not before, a faint indentation along the edge, almost invisible unless you looked closely, a small mark that suggested they had been worn for years, carried through places and moments that had left their imprint without ever needing to be explained. He closed his hand gently around them, not gripping, just holding, and for a moment, the room seemed to narrow into something simpler, the noise of everything he had lost earlier that day fading into the background, replaced by something quieter, something steadier. This had not come from luck, not from chance, and not from anything he had done recently, and that thought did not unsettle him, it grounded him. He set the tags back down and looked once more into the box, scanning what remained, and at the very bottom, almost hidden against the corner, he saw it, a small key, dull with age, its surface worn smooth from use, attached to a thin metal ring that had once held more but now carried only this single piece. He reached in and picked it up, turning it slowly in his fingers, noting its shape, its weight, its quiet presence, and something about it felt and finished, not in design, but in purpose, as if it was meant for something not yet revealed. Ghost lifted his head slightly, watching the key with the same calm focus he had given everything else, and Caleb followed that gaze, his eyes moving from the key to the room around him, to the walls, the floor, the corners that still held shadows even in the dim light. He stood slowly, joints stiff from kneeling, the key still in his hand, and took a step back, looking at the space again, not as a place he had been given, but as something he had been led into. The wind outside brushed softly against the structure, and for the first time since arriving, Caleb felt it differently, not as an intrusion, but as a presence moving through something that had finally been opened. He turned his head slightly, scanning the far wall, the uneven boards, the places where age had left subtle differences. And then his gaze stopped, not abruptly, but with quiet certainty, settling on a section of the wall that did not quite match the rest, a faint shift in texture, a line where there should not have been one, and without needing to say anything, without needing to question it, he knew that whatever this key belonged to, it was not meant to stay hidden much longer. Caleb did not move right away because the moment his eyes settled on that section of the wall, something inside him grew still in a way that was not hesitation but recognition, the kind that did not need proof to feel real. The key rested in his palm, cool and unassuming, yet somehow heavier now that it had a direction, and he turned it once between his fingers as if confirming what he already knew, that it belonged somewhere close, somewhere within reach, not hidden by distance but by attention. Ghost rose quietly beside him, his nails making a faint, rhythmic tap against the wooden floor, and without any command, without even a glance for permission, he walked toward the far wall and stopped directly in front of it, his body aligned with that same subtle seam Caleb had noticed, his posture calm but certain, as if he had already traced this path long before Caleb ever stepped through the door. The room felt smaller now, not confined, but focused, every detail narrowing toward that one place, and Caleb stepped forward slowly, each movement measured, his boots pressing softly against the worn boards as he approached. The wall looked no different at first glance, just aged wood, faded and uneven like the rest, but up close, the difference revealed itself in quiet ways: a slight misalignment in the planks, a faint vertical line where the grain did not match, the kind of detail most people would pass without ever seeing. He reached out, running his hand along the surface, feeling the texture shift beneath his fingers, and there it was again, that same subtle give he had felt in the floor earlier, not obvious, not loose, but present enough to suggest intention. The wind outside brushed against the structure again, a low, steady breath that seemed to move through the seams of the shack. And for a moment, Caleb closed his eyes, not to escape the moment, but to steady it, to let the quiet settle before he crossed whatever line this was. When he opened them again, his focus was clear, and he lowered his hand, bringing the key forward, holding it just inches from the wood as if waiting for the wall itself to reveal where it belonged. Ghost shifted slightly, stepping closer, his nose hovering near a point just below Caleb's hand, and then he stopped. Still as before, his gaze fixed, his presence unwavering, Caleb followed that silent guidance, lowering the key a few inches, and then he saw it, almost invisible unless the light struck it just right, a small, circular indentation set into the wood, worn enough to blend in, yet precise enough to confirm what it was. His breath slowed again, not from tension, but from the quiet gravity of the moment, and he aligned the key with the hidden slot, the metal meeting the wood with a soft, exact fit that left no doubt. For a second, he held it there, feeling the connection, the way the key seemed to settle into place as if it had been waiting for this exact moment, and then, without forcing it, without rushing, he turned it. The mechanism responded immediately, not with a loud click, but with a low, internal shift, something deeper within the wall moving after years of stillness, the sound muted but unmistakable, like a lock remembering how to open. Caleb stepped back slightly as the section of the wall loosened, not swinging wide, not dramatic, just easing outward by a few inches, enough to reveal the darkness behind it, a narrow compartment hidden within the structure itself. The air that slipped out carried a different tone, not stale, not sharp, just older, as if it had been held in place, waiting for release. Ghost did not step back, did not retreat, he remained where he was, watching the opening with the same calm certainty, and Caleb felt it again, that quiet pull, not urging him forward, but inviting him to look, to see what had been placed here with such careful intention. He reached out slowly and pulled the panel open further, the wood moving with a soft resistance before giving way, revealing the space beyond, and as the last of the dim light slipped inside, it caught on something within, not bright, not glaring, but enough to show that this was not empty, that whatever had been hidden here had not been forgotten, and whatever it was, it had been waiting for him to finally see it. Caleb did not step forward immediately because the space behind the wall did not feel like something meant to be rushed, and as the panel rested open, the dim light stretched inward just enough to outline what lay hidden, shapes forming slowly from shadow rather than revealing themselves all at once. The compartment was deeper than he expected, extending into the structure with careful design, not large, but deliberate, every inch used with intention rather than excess, and the air within carried that same quiet stillness, untouched yet not forgotten. He reached forward, his hand steady, and as his fingers crossed the threshold, the temperature shifted slightly, cooler, not cold, just different, as if the space had been sealed from time rather than affected by it. Ghost remained at his side, his body angled toward the opening, eyes fixed, not tense, not alert, just present. Like a witness to something that had already been decided, Caleb's hand moved slowly through the darkness, until it brushed against the first object, and when he pulled it into the light, it revealed itself not with brilliance, but with quiet certainty, a thick bundle wrapped in oilcloth, secured tightly and preserved with care, the fabric worn at the edges but intact, as if whoever placed it there had intended for it to last, not just years, but decades. He set it down gently on the floor beside the open panel, the weight of it solid, real, and then reached back inside, his movements measured, respectful, and this time his fingers found something smoother, flatter, and when he drew it out, it caught the faint light just enough to show its surface, a metal case, polished once but now dulled with age, its edges clean, its presence unmistakably intentional. He paused, glancing briefly at Ghost, who did not move, did not react, only watched, and Caleb understood that this moment did not require confirmation, only continuation. He placed the case beside the wrapped bundle and reached in once more, scanning the interior with his hand, and this time, there was nothing else, no hidden corners, no overlooked detail, just the quiet assurance that what had been placed here had now been found. He leaned back slightly, sitting once more on the worn floorboards, the open compartment behind him, the contents laid out before him, and for a moment, he did nothing, letting the silence settle, letting the weight of the moment exist. Without interruption, outside, the wind softened, brushing lightly against the walls, and the sound no longer felt distant, it felt connected, like part of the same space, the same moment, the same quiet unfolding. Caleb reached for the oilcloth bundle first, his fingers working carefully at the folds, unwrapping it layer by layer, each motion deliberate, until the contents beneath began to take shape, stacks, neatly arranged, secured with bands that had aged but not failed, and as the final layer fell away, the truth revealed itself not with surprise, but with clarity, currency, preserved and protected, not scattered, not hidden in haste, but placed with intention, a reserve left behind not as excess, but as provision. Caleb exhaled slowly, not in shock, not in disbelief, but in understanding that this was only part of what he had been meant to find. He shifted his attention to the metal case, his hand resting briefly on its surface before opening it, the latch releasing with a soft, precise click, and inside, the contents were different, not material in the same way, but no less valuable. Documents, sealed and organized, bearing official markings, signatures, and identifiers that connected them to something beyond this place, something structured, recognized, and real. His eyes moved across them slowly, absorbing what they represented: ownership beyond land, assets beyond cash, connections that extended into systems he understood well enough to recognize without fully needing to read every line. He closed the case gently, not hurried, not overwhelmed, just aware, and leaned back slightly, his gaze moving from the contents to Ghost, who now lowered himself fully to the floor, resting calmly, as if the purpose that had brought them here had been fulfilled. Caleb let out a long breath, the kind that carried both weight and release, and in that quiet, dim room, surrounded by what had been hidden and now revealed, he understood something that did not need explanation, that none of this had been left to chance, and that whatever had begun here long before him had now found its way forward, not through luck, not through force, but through something quieter, something steadier, something that had led him, step by step, exactly where he was meant to be. Caleb did not touch anything for a long moment after the truth had revealed itself, because something deeper than relief had settled into him, something quieter, steadier, like a weight shifting from one place to another rather than disappearing altogether. The money, the documents, the structure of it all, it was real, undeniable, but it was not what held him there, not what kept his hand still and his breath slow. It was the understanding that none of it had been meant to be found by just anyone, that this place, this hidden line of decisions and care, had waited for someone willing to listen before acting, someone who would not tear through it looking for value but would uncover it piece by piece, the way it had been left. Ghost let out a slow breath beside him, his body relaxed fully now, his head resting lightly on the worn floorboards, and Caleb glanced at him with a faint shift in his expression, not quite a smile, not quite anything that needed to be named, just recognition, just quiet gratitude. He reached out and rested his hand gently against the dog's neck, fingers pressing into the thick fur, grounding himself in something simple and real, something that had never changed even when everything else had. Outside, the night had settled completely, the faint glow from the sky replaced by darkness that did not feel empty, only still, and the wind had softened into something almost gentle, brushing along the walls like a quiet reminder that time continued whether you noticed it or not. Caleb stood slowly, his joints stiff but steady, and looked around the room again, not as someone who had just arrived, but as someone who understood where he was now, not fully, not completely, but enough. The shack no longer felt abandoned, no longer felt like something discarded at the edge of someone else's life. It felt intentional, like a place that had carried its purpose quietly until it could pass it on. He moved carefully, gathering the items from the floor, not hurried, not overwhelmed, placing the documents back into the case, folding the cloth back over the bundle, closing the panel in the wall with the same deliberate care it had been opened, the mechanism settling back into place with a soft, final shift that left no trace from a distance. When he finished, the room looked almost the same as before, simple, worn, unremarkable to anyone who did not know where to look, and Caleb paused there, taking it in, not with surprise, but with a calm acceptance that this was how it was meant to be. He stepped outside onto the sagging porch, the wood creaking beneath his weight, and the night air met him fully now, cool and steady, carrying the faint scent of pine and distant earth. The sky stretched wide above him, scattered with quiet stars that did not demand attention but held it all the same. Ghost followed, moving to stand beside him, his posture relaxed, his gaze scanning the dark tree line before settling back toward Caleb, and for a moment, they simply stood there, not waiting, not searching, just present. Caleb leaned lightly against the porch railing, his hands resting at his sides, the key still in his pocket, the weight of it no longer uncertain, and he exhaled slowly, the breath visible in the cool air, drifting away without urgency. He thought of everything that had been taken from him earlier that day, the sharp edges of it, the finality, the silence that followed, and for the first time, it did not feel like an ending, not in the way it had before, not as something that had closed around him, but as something that had cleared a path he had not known to look for. He glanced down at Ghost again, reaching out to rest his hand briefly against the dog's shoulder, and the simple contact carried more certainty than anything he had read. Inside that shack, more grounding than anything written on paper or sealed in metal, Caleb lifted his gaze back toward the dark horizon, the trees standing still, the night stretching wide and open, and in that quiet, with nothing pressing, nothing demanding, he understood something that did not need to be spoken, that what had been left behind here had not just been money or documents or property, it had been trust, placed carefully into time, waiting for the right moment, the right person, the right kind of presence to find it, and now that it had, there was no need to rush forward, no need to prove anything, only to carry it with the same quiet intention it had been given, one step at a time, into whatever came next.